Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lorenzo Soria. I'm the president of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. On behalf of the HFPA, welcome everyone. I'll be really brief. As many of you know, we are lucky enough to be able to give close to $7 million every year to different organizations. They go from film schools, film restoration, refugee camps. We're particularly proud of having been able to support also some organizations that protect our own profession, journalism. And this is what Press Freedom Week is about, discussing, hopefully finding solutions to our profession now under siege in many parts of the world, and also here at home. I want to thank everyone who made this series possible. I want to thank in particular Norm Perlstein and the LA Times for partnering with us, and Mayor Tatna, our chairman of the board, who has been spearheading this initiative. Mayor, where are you?
On July 21st, 2016, 12 armed men burst into an office in Yenagoa, Nigeria, and dragged the editor of the newspaper, The Weekly Source, off to jail, blindfolded and in chains. Jones Abiri was accused of being the leader of a separatist group conducting militant activities. He languished in jail for 2 years with no charges. No access to a lawyer, no access to his family, no access to a doctor. I was tortured, beaten to obtain information, he said. Before I knew, something hit my back. I have severe pain in my back, my spinal cord. So that is why when you see me, I walk unreasonably. The Committee to Protect Journalists publicized Abiri's imprisonment. It met with the Nigerian government and called for Abiri to be freed. The Minister of Information said publicly that he learned about Abiri's imprisonment from CPJ. After CPJ worked tirelessly for 2 years, Abiri was freed in 2018. Unfortunately, he was arrested again this March, and CPJ is again working for his release. Dulcie Rivera is a 36-year-old transgender woman, a longtime US resident, originally from the Honduras. She was detained by US Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2017 and thrown into solitary confinement in the Cibola County Correctional Center in New Mexico in 2018. She was allowed out of her cell for just an hour a day into a metal cage called the yard. You never know what day it is, what time it is, Rivera told the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Sometimes you never see the sun. She tried to hang herself when they took away her yard privileges after nearly a month in solitary confinement. She was discovered, cut down, and thrown back into another solitary confinement cell for another year, resulting in a mental breakdown. ICIJ's report, Solitary Voices, told the stories of Dulcie and the more than 8,400 ICE detainees in solitary confinement, most of which were immigrants from South America. ICE has used this form of punishment for hunger strikers, LGBTQ detainees, and people with mental illnesses or physical disabilities. The investigation, according to ICIJ's practice of collaborative journalism, was done with Grupo Sin in the Dominican Republic, Plaza Publica in Guatemala, Mexicanos contra la Corrupción in Mexico, and The Intercept, NBC News, and Univision in the US. In 2014, an ACLU technologist going through FOIA documents discovered that the FBI had impersonated an AP reporter to deliver malware to the computer of a 15-year-old high school student suspected of making anonymous bomb threats to his school in the Seattle area. The undercover agent assured the student that he was a reporter, and reporters do not reveal their sources. The student was tricked into clicking a link that revealed his location. Members of Congress, the public, and the press were outraged at this practice. But this was not a one-off incident. In 2017, the FBI again used this tactic, this time impersonating documentary filmmakers and going so far as to create a fake production company. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, along with the AP, successfully sued the FBI and the Department of Justice in both cases, after they failed to comply with the records requests about the practice, and forced Justice Department lawyers to admit that the FBI's impersonation of the media makes individuals less likely to speak to journalists. Why would sources speak freely if they believe they are talking to a government agent? The perception is then that the media is an arm of the government, compromising the ideal of a free press. These are the examples of the vital work CPJ, ICIJ, and RCFP do. The reason the members of the Hollywood Foreign Press supported them with grants of $1 million each. Press freedom matters to us. Most of us are immigrants, and we came to this country, as all immigrants do, for a better life. Some escape communism, some poverty, some just for the promise of a new world. As journalists, the ideal of a free press is something we don't take for granted. And when depredations are made on the First Amendment, we feel it incumbent on us to step up. So on behalf of the members, I want to thank Norm Pearlstein and the LA Times for collaborating with the HFPA to make press freedom possible. We are very proud of our support for CPJ, ICIJ, and RCFP. Please visit their websites to see the important work that they do to protect free speech for us all. And welcome to you all for coming today and showing your support. And now it is my honor to introduce the panel. Kathleen Carroll has been chair of the board of CPJ since 2017. She was executive editor and senior vice president of the Associated Press for 14 years before that, responsible for coverage from journalists in over 100 countries, who won numerous awards under her leadership, including 5 Pulitzers. She has addressed the UN Security Council on journalists working in hostile environments, was a member and co-chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board, and worked for the International Herald Tribune, San Jose Mercury News, and the Dallas Morning News. Kathleen. Maria Ressa is the CEO, executive editor, and co-founder of Rappler.com, one of the leading online news organizations in the Philippines. She has been a journalist in Asia for more than 30 years, CNN's bureau chief in Manila and Jakarta, and CNN's lead investigative reporter, focusing on terrorism in Southeast Asia. For the past 7 years, she has been holding the Duterte government to account, facing down misinformation, death threats, and non-stop harassment. She has been arrested 5 times in 2 separate courts and faces the possibility of being jailed for over a decade. For her courage in speaking truth to power, Maria has won several journalistic awards, among them being named Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2018. Maria. Terry Tang is currently an op-ed editor at the Los Angeles Times after 2 years as director of publications and editorial at the American Civil Liberties Union in New York. Prior to that, she was at the New York Times in many different roles, including op-ed editor, deputy editorial page editor, and major beats editor on the Metro desk. She has a BA from Yale and a JD from the NYU School of Law. A Los Angeles native, Terry has worked at the Seattle Times and the Seattle Weekly and was a Neiman Fellow in 1992. Terry? Blanka Zöldi is a journalist with Direct 36, a non-profit investigative journalism center in Hungary, with the mission to expose wrongdoing and abuse of power. Blanka was a journalist at Origo and Upsug and a former freelancer for Figyello, a prestigious Hungarian business and public affairs weekly. At university, she studied journalism and international relations and speaks English, Spanish, and French. As a university fellow, she spent several months in Spain, and she visited Rwanda as one of the winners of a development program of the Poynter Institute. Blanka. The moderator of our panel, Ramzi Malouki, currently serves as the West Coast News Bureau Chief for CNews, the 24-hour news channel of the Canal Group, and is my colleague at the HFPA. He is also the producer and host of the weekly TV show Hollywood Live on Ciné Plus France, as well as a strategy consultant for several TV networks, such as Tahiti Nui Television in the South Pacific and Al Janubia Television in North Africa and the Middle East. A former combat zone reporter for a decade, he was the first journalist to cover the Arab Spring in Tunisia, his country of origin. Ramzi.
Thank you very much, Meher. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy for two reasons. The first reason is I represent here my colleagues who are like me, you know, go from a red carpet to breaking news, because in the Hollywood Foreign Press, there's also the foreign press. And also I'm happy because we have tonight the best of women in journalism. It is a great timing because, as Meher said, I was born and raised in Tunisia. Yesterday in Tunisia we had presidential election, and for the first time in the history of Tunisia, it was a great campaign. I mean, we lived through dictatorship for many, many years. We saw presidential debate on television. We saw, you know, candidates arguing, talking. And also, the most important, this is the first time in the history of Tunisia where there was freedom of the press. No journalists were harassed. Well, only one, you know, he was pushed around. But here's the thing, it's very optimistic. In the country of Tunisia, we've never seen this. In the history of the country, freedom of the press. And this takes me to you, Maria, because, I mean, we heard your bio, and I'm intrigued. How do they let you in and out the Philippines?
I think we have a constitution patterned after the United States. We have a Bill of Rights. There is a veneer of rule of law. But in 2018, in a little over a year, essentially the Philippine government filed one case a month against me and Rappler. So the cases are ongoing. I've posted bail 8 times. In order to travel, I have to then post a bond, and the bond in one court against one charge can reach up to $10,000. Right? So it's prohibitive for sure, but we have a veneer of rule of law. So here I am. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
I mean, Blanka also has a lot of struggle, especially, you know, I mean, 2014 parliamentary election, Hungary.
Yes, exactly. That was a rough time. This was a time when I just became a journalist straight out from university, having my dream job. I really enjoy reporting about the campaign at one of the biggest online daily news websites at Hungary. It was an amazing job, but after the elections, we got to know that our newspaper was getting attacked by the government. It came under very harsh political pressure, and my chief editor was forced to resign after denying to remove some stories from our website. So basically all of the political section resigned, and this is how, after this, we realized that if we want to keep doing what we've been doing before, we need to create our very own nonprofit investigative website, which became Direct 36, where we do investigative journalism.
Kathleen, I mean, from the point of view of CPG, how do you defend these journalists? I mean, what exactly do you do? What are the actions?
So the Committee to Protect Journalists uses journalism as a tool to investigate attacks against journalists, pressure, and issues reports, and then uses the facts that they find in those reports to advocate for the release, to advocate on behalf of Maria.
Thank you.
And Blanka, and we use political pressure, which means we meet with people and tell them they shouldn't beat up journalists. We meet with governments, we meet with opposition leaders in case they ever get elected and change the tenor of the attitude of the government toward journalists. But basically it's a fact-finding organization that uses journalism to help journalists, and then we push and push and push, and you know, all of you know this, it is a slow drip of rainwater on stone to effect change sometimes. But I have to say the staff is remarkable and tenacious, and they believe deeply in the mission.
I have a few numbers here. 16 journalists killed until now in 2019,
right.
And this is from the CPG. 250 imprisoned in 2018. 63 journalists missing. And sometimes you do investigation
Yes.
to know if the death was work-related. How do you do it on the field, knowing that sometimes, you know, Tanzania, Eritrea, you know, you are in countries where it's a hostile terrain?
I have to say the staff is really remarkable. They know their territories, and they know other journalists in their territories, and they just do good reporting. You have to do exactly what you would do as a journalist to find out if the person who was killed was having a fight with a relative or was targeted because of their work. And that's the standard that we use. If we can find that they're targeted because of their work, they go into the database that we have, which is very extensive and explains who's under attack, what kind of attack, what the numbers are, and you know, it's always a very sobering thing to look at those numbers.
You worked at AP for many years, and I'm talking about AP because our network, for example, as you know, 100 countries rely on Associated Press, and I'm talking, you know, on television where there's a breaking news. AP is the first one that has a satellite truck in places where there is no service when we can do our live shot. But things have changed now, you know. What's the evolution of journalism when we go, for example, in a combat zone, Kathleen?
Well, many of you who've worked in combat zones know how different it is today, and social media has changed a lot of it. Let's just take the Iraq War, for example, which seems like 100 years ago, but it was really only, you know, 2003 and 4. The Pentagon was making rules about what you could and couldn't take pictures of, and we were constantly fighting with them because they were trying to censor us. And within a couple of years, every soldier had a GoPro on a little mini tripod and was taking pictures of what they were doing, but we weren't supposed to. You know this for yourself,
Yeah.
Ramzi, that you know, in Bosnia, things began to change. It used to be that, you know, in the old days, in World War II, before Vietnam, American journalists wore uniforms that labeled them as press. And trucks were, you went out with press on your truck and all. And then you became a target because the combatants wanted to tell their own story, and they had the ability to do that with social media. And they didn't want you there anymore because they wanted to control the message. And that's true in almost every facet of what we're going to talk about tonight is everybody has become their own storyteller, and you are disposable to them because you aren't doing what they want you to do.
Maria, you're filming us, right?
You're being live streamed
There we
in
go.
Manila.
There we go.
So,
Yeah. How important is it for you? Because, you know, even backstage, you were preparing everything. You did a little, you know, little introduction, you know, presenting this evening, and it's streaming in the Philippines. How important for you is this tool right here?
Rappler was built on social media, right? We are 7.5 years old, and we helped spread social media in the Philippines. It's part of the reason 4 years running, Filipinos spend the most time on social media globally, right? Rappler grew exponentially, so I know the best of what social media can do. We grew 100 to 300% year on year beginning in 2012. We built communities of action. If you ask me, you know, my elevator pitch for Rappler is, we build communities of action, and the food we feed the communities is journalism. But there's a fundamental sea change in between 2015 and 2016, and we all felt it. And that's when the social media itself was weaponized, was hijacked, and led to this, the election of populist-style, authoritarian-style leaders globally. And the first study started coming out in November 2017, Freedom House. CPJ has done things, RSF has done this, you know, that said in November 2017, it was 28 countries where democracy is being rolled back by cheap armies on social media. 2018, Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project pushed that up to 48. Where are we in 2019? So I think one of the things is that our information ecosystem has fundamentally changed. And one of the biggest problems is that the social media technology platforms are now the largest distributor of news globally. But they left behind the gatekeeping powers of news organizations, which means the way the system is designed, this attention economy, is that lies laced with anger and hate, right? The most negative spread faster and further than those boring facts, right? So this is, and that's part, I think that's the core of the erosion of democracy.
Terry, I want to turn to you, because as an op-ed editor, I'm going to ask a very simple question. Is social media killing the public debate?
I think it's happening on two tracks. So op-eds still can go viral. They still, I mean, if you have an argument, if it's presented in, I mean, every newspaper is in social media. The problem with social media, as Maria says, is that, like on Facebook, you can't understand the algorithm, and it's constantly changing. So you are not seeing what you are actually signed up for. So you may want to follow, but you don't see every post. And most people don't even realize that. So right there, aside from being in a bubble of, where you're only following or you're only resonating to information that you like, aside from that, you literally are not seeing even that. I mean, it's not, you don't know what it is you're not seeing. So that's one big problem with social media. You're given a diet that you can't tell what's missing. Even that, with that, mainstream media does still break through. There's still many times where what mainstream media provides is that reporting, and it's that reporting that by and large goes viral. I was just reading a very interesting report. It was a research report I think it was out of Ohio State. But in any case, it said that a review of the 2016 elections found that most voters did not actually become convinced by misinformation. That they had many different ways of, at least this was in the American election, many different ways of calibrating what was true and what was not true. And that it was a very small effect. I mean, it was an effect, but it was very small. But what was interesting was that a much bigger effect, or more noticeable, was that in smaller communities, conspiracy theories carried far, far more. So that's very concerning. So I think social media has many different tools. Very much, most major media is reliant on social media to spread its news. I mean, the New York Times, the LA Times, all are that's distribution. That's a distribution platform. You'll never get away from that. But at the same time, it's got this other side that basically serves conspiracy theories very, very well. And I don't think we've actually figured out how to change that part of use of social media while allowing the power of its distribution of legitimate information and news to go forward. So,
How do you do it, Blanka? How do you do it? I mean, how do you separate, legitimate news because, social media, even in Hungary, it goes viral, it's big, so how does it work for you?
Yes, in Hungary the situation is quite special because I think that the biggest actor who is spreading misinformation most of the time is the government itself, and all the outlets financed by the state or owned by oligarchs close to the government. So those people who actually like the Facebook page of such organizations, they will be faced constantly with this type of information. And as a small investigative center, what we can do is to bulletproof all of our stories to make sure that we are actually only disseminating facts that are true, because we have been faced with so many times the term fake news. I mean, I know that in the US as well, this is a common way to actually disregard anything which is not liked by the power. But if we have our stories completely bulletproof, then it's very difficult to attack us, because then we say that, hey, could you please point to the part where you think that we are not saying something that is true, and then I think it can fire back as well.
But you know what? You're lucky because you do have the internet. Because in some countries, when there are elections, Kathleen, they cut the internet. You know, the famous digital law,
Yes.
for example, I believe in Benin.
Right. And yes, Vietnam is a place where that is true, and a number of other places where the internet or the services are cut off. And the other danger around elections is the danger to journalists when there are protests or rallies. We see this in the United States with rallies now, but as you and I were discussing earlier, politics is so polarized, and it's a zero-sum game now. It's not, you can't say, I just disagree with you, or we want the same things, but I don't like the way you're going about it. It's, I win, you suck, or I win, you die, True. And that means that every political activity then becomes fraught with this anger and this hatred, and a journalist who's there just trying to record what's happening is, just like in combat, is seen to be a skunk at the picnic if they're not part of the rally itself. And we see this in this has been true in Kashmir for decades and decades, and they're all over the world. It's quite dangerous to go out and cover a public demonstration. In the United States, since we're here in this country, St. Louis is one of the most dangerous places to cover St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, Missouri is one of the most dangerous places to cover a protest in the United States because of police tactics that round up everybody and don't recognize a journalist credential, even if it's a police credential.
Let's go on a lighter note. When you travel, no. And still, it's serious, I just, right now, I got the alert that in Morocco, starting today, we're Monday, right? Starting today, you don't have any more, we were talking about it. You don't have to fill, the little, what do you call it, fiche de renseignement,
Yeah.
I'm also French. And you have to put your profession. And I know that I happened to put, journalist once, put me aside, question what you're doing here. So, from that time, whenever I go to these kind of countries, when they do profession, I put TV host, entertainer, but I don't put journalist. So, do you put journalist when you go, like, let's say, to Rwanda or not?
Obviously, I put journalist, even if that comes with some risk. But you always have to identify yourself as a journalist, otherwise you're...
I mean, I'm not saying we're lying when we say that, because it's true,
Yes.
I work on TV, so I'm on camera, so
I used to
I'm a
say
TV
bureaucrat.
host. I'm sorry?
Bureaucrat.
There we go. What was I talking to you? Maria, obviously, you're known, so basically you have to put journalist.
I do. I own it. I think, not to be offensive on here, I don't think we can duck.
No.
I think this is the time when you have to push back, and we have to push back aggressively, because every single step back you take is not just a step back for journalists, it is a step back for democracy. And I think I'll say one thing on this. I think that the biggest change really is still technology. I keep going back to that because the behavioral economics that drive our information ecosystem today is designed to sap human will, right? It essentially shifts you it's extremely insidious. And fighting this as journalists means not just doing our jobs, it actually means having to A, understand it, B, demand accountability from the social media technology platforms. Please, you're Americans, you are here in LA. What happens here trickles to us in the global South, right? There's a new form of digital colonialism. Our countries are weaker than yours in terms of institutions. When we are out in war zones, in conflict areas, we have no recourse, and this is extremely personal. So the first is, in our case, I fight against impunity of our government, because like in Hungary, like in Brazil, like in Mexico, like in many countries around the world now, the government is using state-sponsored hate, targeting its perceived enemies, and journalists are at the front line. The second thing is, well, what do you do, right? Americans don't think they've been manipulated, and yet, when you look at Cambridge Analytica, the most number of compromised accounts in Cambridge Analytica scandal are here in America, and your own Mueller report shows the disinformation networks that are pounding the fracture lines of your society. The second thing is, the second country with the most number of compromised accounts is the Philippines. And the whistleblower, Christopher Wiley of Cambridge Analytica, actually said that we are the petri dish for you, the target. We're only a jumping off point for you. And he said that if it succeeds in a country like the Philippines, where 100 million people spend the most time on social media, then his word is, port it over to the West. So I'm just saying that, yes, our old problems are there as journalists. Access, when power, so this is both bottom up, and then when power has power, what President Trump did here when he called CNN and the New York Times fake news, a week later, President Duterte called Rappler fake news. It happened in, Bolsonaro says the same thing, or, again, this is global. So, sorry, I'll shut up, and this one last thing, which is, this is an existential moment, and part of the reason I flew all the way here is because you are in the driver's seat. Whatever that phrase is, something flows downhill, we're downhill. But what is being experimented with in our countries is coming to you.
I'm sure in the audience, some of the young people are saying, oh, I want to be like you. I want to do this profession. But the profession has changed. I know my son, who's 9, see me doing a live show, say, Dad, I want to do the same thing. And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Because, it's a challenging time for us. I'm talking, for example, there's a breaking news, you go live, and already everything is there. So we have to find another angle, approach it in another way. It becomes an analysis. It becoming like an editorial approach, So what's the future of our profession, Kathleen?
It's still facts. It's still facts. It may be faster, and more may be required of us. I think it's harder, not because of all of the external things that we've talked to, but because you can't just show up and record what happened and sort of regurgitate it into the paper.
True.
You have to bring something. And I think audiences appreciate it when you're doing something on their behalf, when you're finding things out that they didn't know, when you're advocating for them by finding out how their taxes were being spent, or you're uncovering corruption. And that's harder work than sitting at a trial or going to a political meeting, and we need to do those things, but we need to invest more in finding out facts that matter to our audiences. And that's harder work than it was when many of us, speaking personally, started. And but I think that's where our profession will thrive. And it's the rock we stand on, but we don't always live up to it.
Terry.
I would also say that it's not that easy to do. So
No.
you can't just be.
That's right.
In fact, I was talking to a very young writer, and she really wanted to be, a journalist, and whether she could just go out there and just sort of be it's not. I mean, when you think about the journalism, any investigative journalism, it doesn't even have to be investigative. How do you actually cover a city council meeting? What are the questions to ask? It's not that easy. It takes time, and it takes experience, and it takes training. Some of it, maybe you don't have to go to journalism school, but you have to be trained in how you think about something. So, unfortunately, I mean, the industry itself is obviously changing a lot, but the skills you need, that's not going to change.
No.
And so for young people, I think that's, so, if you're competing against, a blogger who is aggregating stuff, which has real value, it's not quite the same as actually getting the actual real facts of what you're talking about.
But the bloggers aren't going to have anything to aggregate if journalism goes away.
Yeah, and actually figuring out what's happening in City Hall, actually happening, with the Jeffrey Epstein case. That is not ever going to be done by somebody who's trying to aggregate something. It's incredibly hard. In fact, almost, sometimes you hit a wall and you can't do it, even professional journalists. But that's kind of what it takes. Here in LA, what the LA Times did with the USC investigations, unbelievably hard, because USC is a private institution. There is no FOIA that you can ask, and they'll just they'll just hand you their financial documents or hand over people who had complaints about sexual abuse. And that just took skills that you don't just wake up and have. And so it's really, really inspiring when young people want to figure out, how do I get those skills? Even without an industry that's as wealthy as it was and as healthy as it used to be for ad dollars, and everybody kind of probably already understands the secular change in the industry. But yeah, I don't think that's ever going to be replaced.
What do you think?
I have quite an interesting experience just last year when I taught one semester of investigative journalism at one of the best universities of Hungary. And in the very beginning of the course, I asked people, hey guys, so who wants to be an investigative journalist? There was complete silence. And I was like, okay, this course will be interesting. There were a couple of hands raised when I asked them who wants to be a journalist then. But obviously, as we mentioned, it's a very hostile environment, even in Europe, where I come from, which is taken as a place where press freedom is in a good shape. But we have seen a sharp decline in this regard over the past few years, with some horrifying examples, with Daphne Caruana Galizia in 2017, in Malta being killed by a car bomb. Then just a few months after that, another investigative journalist, Jan Kuciak in Slovakia, together with his fiancée, murdered, shot to death in their own home. These are just horrifying examples for young students. And at home as well. I mean, we are not having journalists killed and imprisoned, but we are getting labeled as the enemy of the people, as it might sound familiar to you as well. I've been called a foreign agent, I've been called a liar, and a paid activist of the opposition, and so on and so forth. But what I told students and what I keep telling to everybody, actually, that I think in hostile environments, we have to work even harder, and we have to work together, and this might be the most important thing. We have to realize that we are not alone in our country as journalists. So I know it might sound ridiculous in the competitive environment and everything, but I think that even in a home country, journalists could work together and show more solidarity towards each other. I mean, let's take a press conference. If somebody asks a question, doesn't get an answer, then I think it's a duty of the next journalist to keep asking that question until it gets answered.
Amen, amen, amen.
And one more thing, on the other hand, we shouldn't forget either that we are not alone globally as journalists. We are facing very, very similar problems, and we can also find solutions together. Coming from a very small country, I'm very grateful that our organization can work together with ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, that brings together hundreds of journalists around the world to do groundbreaking investigative stories. Obviously, you know about the Panama Papers, which is based on the biggest leak in journalism history. And actually sharing information with other journalists, on the one hand, gives us possibility to uncover stories that might not be told in other countries. And on the other hand, it also gives us protection, because you might be able to silence one journalist, but you will never be able to silence hundreds of them. So I think this gives us a possibility for freedom even during difficult times.
Talking about ICIG, I had the pleasure to be one of the panelists in a recent, event like this one, where we had, gentlemen from Der Spiegel, who was like one of the journalists, who uncovered the Panama Papers. So I'd like to know how it works, because, for example, in France, Le Monde participate also at, ICIG. There's like 80 countries, I believe, 200 journalists. But people don't know exactly how they communicate, how they keep this secret, how they share all this information. Who want to talk about it?
I mean,
How about the person who's working with you?
Yeah,
Blanka, okay.
exactly. I mean, obviously we communicate in secure channels.
Right.
I don't know that if I can tell more about that.
No worries.
I don't want to, but yes, I think this is the basis for all the investigations, and I hope that we are being quite open about how we are working together, how we are cooperating. Actually, there will be a movie about Panama
That's
Papers
exactly
as well,
what I was saying,
just to do a little bit of marketing for tomorrow's screening about Panama Papers. So anybody who is interested in the nitty-gritty of the...
Well, here's the thing, we have to talk about it. This is Steven Soderbergh's movie. It's called The Laundromat, starring Gary Oldman, Meryl Streep, and that movie is giving us, a glimpse, but maybe not everything about, because you've seen the movie or not?
No,
Not yet, okay.
Yeah.
So
Tomorrow I will.
all right, another lighter note. Here's the thing, my experience, first thing in the morning, I swear to God, the phone is here, first thing in the morning, I open my eyes, I do this.
Yep.
And I check alert, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, in every country. I'm Tunisian, French, and American, so imagine, I go and check every single one of them. First thing you do in the morning, Maria?
absolutely.
Same?
Same. I have 3 phones. But that is our world today,
I know,
right? And I think that part of it is really understanding that our world has fundamentally changed, even though it looks the same. I think this is I sound like I'm an alarmist again, but I will say that this is an existential moment. If we do not, I agree completely that we have to collaborate, because the truth tellers are not collaborating, and in each of our countries, the information ecosystem is being taken over by disinformation networks. Again, I have data for the Philippines to show us how news groups have been systematically attacked and how they push news groups to the side and are now occupying, also primarily state-sponsored, right? And they're proxies. And this is happening in many countries around the world. So what do? We live with this. There was a period in time when we were doing, in 2016, we did the weaponization of social media, propaganda war. It was a 3-part series, the first one. I did 2 of the 3 parts in that one. As soon as it came out, I was receiving an average of 90 hate messages per hour. That's per hour, right? I can I've worked in war zones. I was a conflict reporter for CNN. I've covered every change of government in Southeast Asia, and yet nothing prepared me for this. And it took me 2 weeks to even just fathom, like, I actually tried to figure out, I tried to respond to all of the messages, which that wasn't its end goal. Its end goal is to just pound you to silence. I never thought this could happen in the Philippines, because it happened like this overnight, and it changed values, and it incites hate. It changes who you are fundamentally. So I will go forward to say that as journalists, we cannot stand alone. We must collaborate. And then the second part, of course, is our communities. You can't sit back. It's hard for you to sit back right now because there is so much at stake.
United States, we're approaching the elections, and I want to talk to Terry about op-ed. So how are you prepared, to get all this, prose and writing and, as an editor?
Well, op-ed is a very specialized thing because it's seeking out outside guest contributors to get a diverse point of views and legitimate fact-based, pieces, articles that we then publish. And our first, it may sound old-fashioned, but we say to all of our contributors who we reach out to, is that you have to tackle your opponent's best argument. And you have to respond to it, you have to acknowledge it, you have to refute it. Because you can't, we're trying to present a real argument for readers. But I think, so that's what I'm doing now is pretty narrow. But I think in news coverage, political news coverage, it is quite challenging, more challenging than it has been in the past, because you're kind of playing 3D chess. Because one, you need to deal with the horse race, right? And like who's up, who's down. That's just kind of bread and butter. I mean, some people think that that's pointless, but it exists, and readers want to know. And that's one of the things that journalism does. The other thing is policy analysis. You have to understand what the positions are of all the candidates. That's not easy to do, and that takes journalism. You're not going to aggregate that. Okay, and now with kind of the new world of social media, and certainly with Trump, you can be chasing that, responding to that kind of constant news events. They're little events, but in some ways trying to decide what counts, what do you need to respond to. So it makes political coverage very, very hard. And when the president is kind of attacking the press for being fake news, every other day there's a all caps kind of tweet, it becomes very hard to, it does become hard to penetrate so that you're actually having a real discussion about policy, whether healthcare reform. What is healthcare reform? If you as a journalist are trying to explain what various candidates are talking about, and then you have the president coming in kind of like an asteroid, it's actually very, very hard to do the work you're supposed to be doing. So I think that's a real challenging situation.
How many writing, forgive me, I'm just going to do something, because we're filmed, I just want you to look good, so I'm going to put the mic. It's, TV reflex. How many, paper you receive a week? I'm trying to understand, because a lot of people wants to write,
Well, it's more than it's ever been. So I would say we probably get, maybe it could easily be 50 to 100 submissions a day.
How do you select them?
So we actually do look through them, and we choose. I mean, some can come from experts, some can come from just general people in the public, but a lot of op-eds, the best op-eds are pieces that we commission. So we are reaching out to experts or people who have personal experience or a personal story. So the best, we read just about everything that comes over to us in our email, but a lot of our pieces are pieces we've asked for. And so we work very closely with those writers. And, you know, it's opinion, but it's fact-based, which, you know, that's what journalism is about. That's what opinion journalism is all about, so.
Kathleen, I want to go back to CPJ, because, you know, not a lot of people know how it works, because you guys do a lot of work, you know, in probably every single country, but it's a very small staff, and that we don't know.
No, they're remarkable, and if you spend any time on the website, cpj.org, you'll find this rich trove of data about what's happening to journalists around the world. And I want to just pause for a second, because I think it's important to understand we're here defending a profession that we love and that has been a part of our lives for decades. And that's true for some of you. I know one great trial reporter, Linda Deutsch, who's in the audience. But what CPJ is protecting is journalism, and what journalism stands for is your right to facts, your right to accurate information. And in the United States, your right to ask questions, since the First Amendment doesn't protect only those of us with a press card, it protects everybody's right to ask questions of their government. The staff at CPJ is under 50, which is remarkable given their impact, and they are incredibly mission-driven, and they are incredibly productive, and they get a lot of work done, and it's because they believe in this mission so deeply, like we all believe in what we do. They, you know, when a journalist they know is in trouble, it's a personal thing for them. And they're talking to the families, and they're trying to get people out, and they're trying to get people out of trouble. And sometimes these journalists are in jail for years and years and years, and they become part of the CPJ family. And we rejoice when they are released, and we grieve when they are killed. But it's all credit to the staff. You know, I just do my part to try and draw attention to them, because they're the ones who do all the work.
You know, I mean, over there, you know, when they are in the country, I mean, these are people, and the government know that they're part of the CPJ, right?
For the most part. It depends on how intrusive a government is. You know, CPJ operates with journalistic standards, just like news organizations do. And I take your point, my friend Maria, that you should always stand up for things. But if you don't have to lie to get into a country, you can bear witness to something that if you said, I'm a journalist, what are you going to do about it? And they turned you away.
No, it's true. It's true.
No, so it's a fine line, but they operate under the same journalistic principles that all of us here do. And sometimes people, sometimes the staff has not been treated well. And we've argued about that with the government involved. But our main focus is on the journalists who are in trouble, and we're trying to get out of trouble.
And there's a lot of them. Maria,
There's
do
a
you
lot
ever
of them.
fear for your life?
Oh gosh. Look, I would be foolish if I didn't, right? But at the same time, so I think there are all these gradations, and you know, I thank God for CPJ, because CPJ came through. Kathleen and CPJ came to Manila at a very crucial time. Look, no time, and I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, I've never lived through a time that has demanded so much from journalists as now. And moving forward and pushing back does not mean being stupid and not being aware of the threats and the danger you could be in. So the way we think about it is, you know, you think through your worst case scenario. Like when you walk into a war zone, you plan for the worst case, and then everything else is much easier if you have that done. I think about it like Buddhism, you know, like the first noble truth of Buddhism is all life is suffering. If you accept that, everything is really good, right? Right? I mean, I hate to say, but that's kind of like our profession right now, because we're under attack on two fronts. One is just our business model is dying or dead, and then we're also, our the trust that we had, because there is a fire hose coming at you. You can't tell fact from fiction. And where you are consuming, 2 years ago, 69% of Americans got their news from social media. Where you are consuming the news feeds you more lies than facts. And so how do we rely on you to stand up for us? And this is part of the reason why we're all here, right? CPJ is, so I think there's also the other difference, which is which news groups are struggling with right now, the difference between journalism and activism, right? For me, I think about it as, when they arrested me, I was unshackled. I'm fighting for my rights, personally and professionally. And I don't think you're that far away from me right now, to be honest.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Since we have an unusual panel in that you're the only guy on the stage.
I know, that's so funny, right?
The CPJ just released a report last week about how women journalists are harassed so much more on social media. And any of you who've ever covered anything in your whole life, Maria's staff is if not more than 50% largely female, right? And
63%
now
women.
there you go. And women journalists will say to their male colleagues, hey, take a look at my feed and see if at my traffic and see, if you could take it. Yeah. And it's going to get worse as we go into 2020, not just in the United States, but everywhere. And I'm wondering, what's been your experience with this, and how do you all deal with it?
Well, it's different. I mean, for me, if I may ask, if I may answer about myself, it's different. First of all, because I'm a news bureau in LA, so I'm covering the West Coast. So I'm not really in the station and the TV network, So I do have, the Instagram and everything. Right. As far as traffic, is not like a million of followers. But as I told you before, okay, I happen to be French, Tunisian, and American, and I separate the three of them, which means, one social media goes only to Europe, one goes to the South Pacific, and one goes to what we call NEMA, which is, North Africa, Middle East. But the thing is, I don't see a feedback that is my colleague, for example, in Tunisia gets. And I know in Tunisia, there's a lot of under the belt. There's a lot of trolls. There's a lot of hate. To go back to what you were saying, Maria, it's true that at the beginning, when I saw a reaction, from like a tweet or something like this, where people were insulting, but it really something really strong, it affected me. And then somebody told me, don't read it. Don't read it. Just do like a complete abstraction of all the hate. Just keep whatever you put in. Now, to go back to what you were asking, I think in Tunisia, and I'm taking that example because I've been following, the presidential election, women journalists, believe it or not, and this is a country, as you know, where under Bourguiba, Tunisia got its independence in 1956. Bourguiba was the one who really freed the women. We have, women rights. We have ministers that are women. So comparing to another Muslim and Arab country, believe me, we're really, really, really far away. In Tunisia, I have to say, the stars on TV, and I'm talking about political journalists, are women. They're not guys, they're women, In the newspapers, well, actually not the newspapers, in the website like Business News, like Panelists, which are, the most read, website, women are editorial, editor-in-chief, or even write, the editorial. So this is the example I can give you about, the importance of women journalists, and specifically in Tunisia. And I'm very happy, actually, even though, with the presidential election gave us an outcome that was the worst case scenario. We have two candidates in the second round. One is in jail for, money laundering and own a TV station. And the other one is a guy who came from absolutely nowhere, no affiliation, but we think he's Islamist or not. And that's the whole debate on Facebook right now. Is he for the Sharia or is he against Sharia? And that's the whole thing. And we're going to have to wait until October 13 to know who's going to be the president democratically elected in Tunisia, while all the people from the system, all the political parties, the people that are being politicians for years and years and years, are all out of the game. Why? Because they all have an ego and they divide it, which means within one party, it's like 2 candidates, 3 candidates, 4 candidates. And when you look at the charts, it's like 1%, 2%, 2.5%. And then we ended up with what? We ended up with, I told you, a guy with no affiliation or whatsoever, and another guy who's in jail and waiting for the second round of the election. Anyway, why am I talking? I'm supposed to moderate. No, it's great because this is, you know what I like about it? It's like, I mean, we're all colleagues here. So it's great to have this kind of conversation, you know? And it's more like an exchange, like, you know, beside having like a big paper and a pad and a pen and, you know, and next question is, do you fear for your life?
Honestly, I don't, but maybe I'm too naive.
No, you're not naive.
No, the scariest thing is, as I was talking about the situation in Slovakia, the colleagues of the murdered journalist, when they went on television after this horrible thing, the most interesting thing that they said, that they felt really free. You know, they had several newspapers, they could write about what they wanted, they didn't feel threatened at all. So I was thinking, oh my God, they were in a lot better situation than we are now in Hungary. So although we are not receiving any personal threats as such, still the hostile environment, what is created by the government kind of would make it possible. I don't know. I hope not. I hope that we don't have to get to a point where we find it out. And this is what Maria was talking about, that this is really a crucial point in the life of countries, to actually stop the process when it's possible, when journalists are not getting killed. So this is what we have to
Can I just add the methodology of this, right? So
Yeah.
we haven't really talked about that, which is, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Right? So for us, the attacks against us are these exponential attacks, bottom up, that's online, no facts, no, right? You don't know. This is to you. We'll go to us first. So bottom up, and then when it's bottom up, the end goal is to make you not trust anything. And if you don't trust anything, then the voice with the loudest megaphone comes top down, and you believe they gain more power, right? Whether it's your country, my country, it's the same thing. So that methodology has worked, and the first one, of course, is Russian disinformation. If you look at it, think about it like our system, the body is, you've been given drugs. And the drugs is like the first time you take it, you're okay. You can get over it. The second time you take it, you get addicted. The third time you take it, you get more addicted, and you are no longer the same person. That was the head of the KGB who said that. This is now what we're doing. Why are women under attack, and why is our society splintering? Because that is the information ecosystem that we have. I'm sorry, I'm so focused on the tech because it's hard. I think the first step is to stop the impunity of information operations, so that those leaders who are popularly elected do not use a scorched earth policy to consolidate and maintain power.
Going back to the U.S., you know, and the elections, I want to know how. I mean, is there freedom of the press in the United States, Kathleen?
Well, there is, but I would say that a number of the things that we've talked about here have an impact, right? And I think Terry should weigh in on this as well. The greatest threat to freedom of the press in the United States is the collapse of the business model and the destruction of news organizations that are going away. And you don't have freedom of the press if you don't have any press. Yeah. And there are too many communities where there's no journalist anywhere. And there are new studies that underscore what we've all sort of thought, which is when there's not a news organization covering your community, voter participation goes down, the number of candidates who run for office goes down, the amount of government spending goes up. Can you imagine such a thing? The scrutiny goes away, and the community is lesser and diminished by the lack of a news organization. You know, whatever you think of the news organization, at least there's someone there who's asking questions. And I think that's a much greater threat to freedom of the press in this country. It's going to be dangerous to cover a political rally in St. Louis, for sure. I think the other thing that is dangerous for us here is something that has been a problem for a long time, and I've been honking on about this for a decade or more, and that's that we as a profession didn't take the threat seriously. We didn't take advantage of the fact that we have a First Amendment and that we have Freedom of Information acts that protect government, protect our right to government information, your right to government information. And we, journalists elsewhere are fighting desperately for those kinds of things, or fighting to preserve the veneer of it, depending on where you are. And I don't think we worked together enough to protect those and keep those rights vigorous. And if we don't do that now, it is completely on us as citizens, not just as a profession, that we didn't stand up for our own rights.
I mean, don't you think it's outrageous when you go to cover the border? I mean, you go to south of, San Diego. I mean, you go to the border here, and then they take your ID, and it happens to me, and I have a press card. We have the sheriff's press pass. I mean, they take your ID, and then they do all this, background check, and then you're on a database. Mm-hmm. I mean, where are we? I mean, this is the United States. I mean, I came here thinking, being a correspondent here is like, being in a luxury kind of situation. Well, actually, it's not.
So what are you doing about it?
About that? Mm-hmm. Nothing. What can I do? What can I do about it?
That's the attitude that's going to kill us.
Right.
I know, but I mean...
I'm serious. I mean, it's...
What should I do then, Kathleen?
Well, I think you should be in touch with your friends at the Reporters Committee and alert your friends at the Committee to Protect Journalists. And,
no, actually,
we're going to organize together. We have to organize, because otherwise, it's going to be a death of 1,000 cuts, but in person at a border, or in person at a meeting that you're supposed to be able to attend and you can't.
So actually that access part is very familiar to us as well, right? It's these authorities cross and erode a lot of these time-tested relationships, agreements that we used to have. And imagine if Jim Acosta didn't stand up and the press corps didn't come together. But it's the ones that are hidden like that is insidious as well. I guess I'll go with Kathleen on this, in that if you don't fight for it now, you will only get weaker. Your rights will erode without you even realizing you've lost them. That's certainly what's happened in the Philippines.
Now, the classic protocol, I mean, here's the thing, let me rephrase it. The classic protocol, when it happens to you and it happened to me, the classic protocol is to write to your editor-in-chief or write to Directeur de l'Information, director of news, who actually takes care of it, because we do have, a whole office taking care of that in Paris. But me, personally, as a human, what do you want me to do? I'm just a correspondent, and I mean, my guy is over there. We're only two in the bureau, here in LA. So we're not CNN, I mean, plus, I mean,
Yeah, but not everybody is a large organization. Most news organizations are smaller. And you go.
I also wanted to add, and Kathleen would know the details of this so much, is government subpoena of news sources and information that obviously of the phone logs of AP reporters, and then also leak prosecutions, prosecuting sources. If you don't have sources, you're not going to have the news.
Right.
So that's an end run around press freedoms.
Right.
So that's a very, very troubling, very dangerous kind of trend that's happening in the U.S. I mean, in the Trump administration, the Obama administration, that was one thing they were very, very bad about, was leak investigations that then targeted the sources. And the Trump administration is going full bore in that direction. So that's...
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And we were talking about this earlier. Everybody I say this to is always shocked, just to underscore Terry's point. The Obama administration went after tried to frog more journalists and the people who talked to them into jail than all of the other presidents before him combined. Mm-hmm. And people always have that reaction, really? No, So this is a bipartisan issue.
It is, yes, yeah. And maybe it was cultural that it was not seen as something you could do, that's crossed the line because of I mean, it's a soft power, right? Yeah. Press freedoms, and with, I mean, any administration, you just expect them to abide by norms that we've all lived with, And if they bust through those norms, it's like the media guidelines at the Department of Justice. Nobody's actually going to prosecute the DOJ for violating their own media guidelines, but we expect them to live within the norms of their media guidelines as to when they seek subpoena, when they tell you they're going to subpoena your contacts information or your phone logs or whatever, and tell the news organization. But if they decide to bust through that because there is not anyone holding them accountable, then that's very, very perilous.
Before we're gonna let you, ask some questions, Blanka, tell us a little bit about your organization, the staff. How many are you? Where do you work? Are you in an office? Are you in your apartment? I mean, it sounds like a spy movie,
Yeah, it's not a spy movie as such, but yeah, I was just trying to calculate like how many are we. It didn't take too long because we are 6. Right at this time, we are working from basically a small apartment in downtown Budapest. And as we talked about it, I mean, in Hungary we have seen the same problem that as media functioned, it was already like written in its own structure that it can be corrupted in a way. Right after our government came to power back in 2010, the first thing was to change the media law and then to take over the state media, which was turned into basically a mouthpiece of the government. And nobody thought that they could get the hands on private media. Like, our organization was owned by Deutsche Telekom, and who would mess with them, right? But the thing is that nobody is protected when you're dependent on an owner, when you're dependent on advertisement even. So after our organization came under political pressure, we realized that we have to be independent from all of these people and factors. So this is why we came up with the idea of actually creating a small organization, but an organization which can write about whatever under whichever circumstances, because most of our revenue comes from our supporters, from our readers. It's horrible. Every beginning of the year, we have to stand in front of cameras and do these like campaigning videos, which is completely not our style. We want to, sit behind the computer, write our articles, research and everything. We are not superstars, but we have to, behave like that to convince people that it is actually worthwhile to invest in quality information. So this is what we are trying to do on the one hand, trying to survive with the help of our supporters, and on the other hand, we are also trying to find an answer to the problem of trust. So once we have our supporter base, we invest a lot of time and energy into keeping in touch with them. It's actually quite a nice feeling that I don't only see the likes on the articles from phraseless crowds or the hate speech coming into my inbox, but we can actually meet with our supporters at meetings. We can ask them, hey, what do you think about this article? Do you have any ideas what we should research about? And it's just taking back journalism into the human sphere, away from the computers and the online space, and we can see that people really appreciate it, and we can learn a lot from each other. We organize workshops. I teach them how to deep search Facebook and these kind of things, but they also give us a really great feedback about our work. So I think it's really a win-win situation.
Maria, how many are you?
We're about 100 people.
Wow.
And we zoomed very fast. We grew in about a year's time from 12. We started with 12 to 75.
When?
And again,
When did you start?
2012. So I came off of broadcast journalism, television, big corporate media. I then moved from almost 2 decades with CNN to join the largest television network in the Philippines. I headed the news group there. I managed 1,000 journalists. Then I realized that it's extremely hard to pivot a huge organization because it starts with a mindset and legacy tech, right? So that's why part of the reason we started Rappler, it was actually easy to start with nothing, easier, and to combine old and young, which is digital natives and then enough experience, right? And it was an incredible, I think what makes us different is we are medium scale. In a year and a half, we became the 3rd top online news site, the first digital-only news site. And we were, in my role, I look at, I'm not just a journalist, I run the business. And it is important to have good business, to be able to be independent. And then the last part that's critical is tech. So we built tech platforms. The first one is actually a disaster risk reduction platform, which we handed over to our government in 2014 and 2015 after Super Typhoon Haiyan. So I guess my end goal in this one is to continue to grow, but we must chart the future of journalism in a completely different way from the way we have done this in the past. And I'll say one last thing about something we haven't touched on at all, which is data. Americans are so, Westerners are so focused on data privacy, but I don't think it's data privacy you should worry about, because the data is already there. It is already in the public sphere, and you've willingly given it away. It is how that data is being used in micro-targeting, how you are being insidiously manipulated. Again, I sound like doom and gloom because I suggest you read a book by Shoshana Zuboff. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, because we're talking about election integrity. You cannot have election integrity if we do not have free will. Right? And that's the biggest question now that technology poses for us. So free press, yes, we will fight on the front lines, but we need to fight this whole new sphere that has triggered this deterioration of democracy, that triggered the elections of Duterte, Orban, Putin. I mean, again, the dictator's playbook is out there.
Listen, we have 10 minutes. I'd like to ask you, there we go. We have a mic ready. I believe this gentleman right here. We have this gentleman right here. All right, let's start here. Anyone has a mic, please, for this gentleman right here? He's going to ask you. Shortcut. I apologize, the shortcut. I apologize. I have the light in my face, sir.
But I'm the first one. Anyway, yes, Kathleen, I wanted to pick up on a point you made, which I think is very good, and I don't hear much about this. I think you're right that the profession of journalism doesn't have financial priority, and that's why it's deteriorating. It seems to me that the void is being filled now by the rich people, like celebrities, that may not really be qualified to say a lot about the news. Meryl Streep is a brilliant woman, but she's playing a part in a movie about, a woman who was a newspaper editor in the Post, say. I think people like that can sometimes have undue influence over the minds of the public because of their notoriety and because they have a certain presence that might be exaggerated because of roles they play or because of things that they do as activists. Do you agree with me about that?
No, actually, I don't. Because, look, aside from the fact that Meryl has been very good to CPJ and she's never tried to tell us, what to write, celebrity endorsements for things and celebrity opinions about things go back, and forever and ever and ever. I mean, celebrities used to advertise cigarettes in Life magazine, and I think celebrities are as entitled to opinions as any of the rest of us. And if people decide to pay more attention to them because they have some celebrity status, that's sort of on the individual. And that I'd be happy if celebrities endorsed the idea of facts. That's and that's a lot of them who support CPJ are about the mission of facts and journalism, and they don't try and tell us what to do about it. And so, I understand where you're coming from. I just see it in a slightly different way.
The gentleman all the way in the back, and then, sir, the gentleman with the yellow jacket afterwards. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name's Toby. I'm a reporter with NHK Japan. Mm-hmm. And I want to follow up on that question there about the collapse of the business model. It's basically what we've seen is 60% of all online ad revenue have been gobbled up by Google and Facebook, and this is
more than that.
More than that. Huge portion, and this is what has destroyed the hometown paper. So, going forward, how do we fix this business model, in the collective opinion of the panel, because, I work for public media now, it's basically state media, and we get to, dig in on stuff and have, longer conversations on things because we're on the public dollar. And I used to be with Al Jazeera, and it was the same thing too. You have to deal with state biases in those contexts as opposed to commercial biases. But in my experience, I don't really see a viable option coming from the commercial sector right now to be able to sustain a critical, thoughtful discourse with what's happening with these corporate hegemonies that we see especially arising in the U.S. We get all of our information from like 7 companies here. So institutionally, on the biggest possible critical, thought process paradigm, how do we save journalism that is really engaged in creating more civic discourse from a financial perspective?
Terry, you go and then I'll go.
Not that there are no easy answers,
Right.
but there are different models. So I think the online advertising is you kind of continue working at that. Obviously, every newspaper that still exists has online advertising sales force, right? So there are people trying to sell ads, and there's still there's an ad department. But subscriptions are just ever more important to every newspaper. I'm sorry?
Should we be advocating as journalists for a tax?
Well, the other thing that's kind of the American equivalent of the tax is the nonprofit status of ProPublica, for example,
Right.
or the Marshall Project. So those groups are doing superb journalism. Just world class. And their tech is fantastic. But they're pretty limited in how much they can cover of the world. But there's going to be more of that. And those are Pulitzer Prize winning journalists there, and the work they're doing is phenomenal. And those are pretty young, those are people who are just entering journalism, not just entering, but they're excellent journalists, but they're also kind of digitally native. And so that's very hopeful. And then there's really interesting models, like there's Report for America. It's a new program where it's like Teach for America, but it's a combination of raising funds from major foundations and then also donors to seed journalists, reporters into struggling mid-size regional papers. So that fellowship is funded by, Report for America and like Teach for America. So you go there, you train up, you learn as a reporter, a Metro reporter, and then you bring, and that resource may not have been possible. That slot may not have been funded by the struggling paper.
So you don't think like a tax or a public thing would ever work in the U.S.?
I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I just think that that's not a model that we've ever had. And the nonprofit status is sort of like that,
Well, beyond that, that works in countries that have federal systems that, like rather than individual taxing authorities. Listen, I know newsrooms want there to be one magic bullet that will replace print advertising, and they don't have to think about it. And that's just not going to happen. There are a lot of places that are trying it. I think the answer is in Bianca's newsroom and others where you agree to pay for content. And here's my challenge to you. How many of you pay for cable TV, a phone service, a streaming service, maybe several streaming services, a music service? Think about all the subscriptions that you pay for every month to bring you content, almost none of it local. And I challenge you to commit 1 month of your content subscriptions to your local news organization. That's where our future is.
Gentleman right here. Good evening, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. 2 quick questions. How do you position the case of Julian Assange and the government onslaught against journalism? And then the second question, quickly, for Maria. you mentioned your article on the weaponization of the media, and the next day the onslaught of hatred. You also said that Cambridge Analytica was using the Philippines as an experimental platform. How much of that onslaught, which was sudden and unprecedented, do you attribute to that kind of subversive activity by something like Cambridge Analytica?
I mean, I'll take the second part of your question first, which is, it's hard to tell, but it is an entire system, right? We watched, because we were first movers onto social media, we were able to map our communities, the growth of our communities, and now we map networks of disinformation. And what we do is we're one of 2 Filipino Facebook fact-checking partners. Fact-checking is a whack-a-mole game. We shouldn't be talking about content. We should be talking about the networks of disinformation, the networks that spread that content and make it go viral. When we look at those networks, and we have over 1 terabyte of data now in a database we call the Shark Tank, not after your Shark Tank, but our Shark Tank. When we look at that, it is systematic. There have been 6 waves of it. And it plays to the worst of human nature. The end goal, again, is to incite you to violence, incite you to hate. It reminds me, after 9/11, I spent a lot of time looking at terrorist networks in our part of the world, and it is that same thing. It creates an us against them. It incites you to hate. And online violence, as you know, leads to real world violence, right? So for me, Cambridge, for Christopher Wiley to say that they go to countries like the Philippines, they experiment in the global south, kind of makes sense, because it's impunity. And then when it works, and this is the first time again that we have a global landscape where we are all connected. So if you think that the social media part of it, the toxicity is a one-off, think again about the scope of the problem. We are being manipulated. And what do we need to do as journalists is we need to expose that. That's the first. The second thing is we need to help find the noise, because and all the studies have shown this, even if you are given a fact, if you don't like it, in this environment, it is possible for you to not believe the facts. We place to the cognitive bias of the individuals. So how else? This is part of the reason I think, the next step is to actually have the truth tellers working together, because still we live in an old world of competition. And one of the first things that happened in the US, at least in CPJ, was instrumental in this, was to get all the news groups together to drop the ball on New Year's Eve, from CNN to Fox, and I think, so that I think is, but look at, I will tweet a bunch of articles that has the data. In our country, we documented it. And, the attacks against media are exponential. The attacks against women journalists are 10x more than the attacks against men.
All right. Ma'am, right here, and then lady right here. And I have to say, it's the last 2 questions.
Hi. My name is Linda Deutsch, and I was a journalist with the Associated Press for 48 years here in Los Angeles. And full disclosure, I worked with Kathleen for much of that time. I want to first commend all of you for the work that you're doing under such difficult circumstances, and for carrying the torch forward on journalism. It's a huge challenge right now, but I have to tell you that I feel today like an artifact of a different era, when journalism was respected, when I could walk into the office of any public official, I could go into the chambers of a judge, and they would welcome me, not necessarily want me there, but they would certainly respect me enough to talk to me. And that seems to have disappeared, is that respect. And I have to say that maybe Obama did put out subpoenas for a lot of reporters, but I never heard him get up and say we were the enemy of the people. And I think that this administration has done more damage than any in that regard. But I question, and maybe Kathleen and Tracy could really answer this, how did we get here? I remember when there were a lot of brain trusts getting together. There was a group way back called like News Media for Now or something like that, in which people got together in groups and they were talking about the future of news and the future of newspapers, and then it all just went away and nothing was done. And I wonder if it was the change in our society, or was it neglect on the part of the journalism industry?
Yes. Okay.
It was both?
Yes, yes, I think so.
Thank
I
you.
mean,
It's good to have you. Can you get the mic to the young lady, please? Appreciate it.
I'm so honored to be here. I'm a civilian, so I'm not a journalist, but I'm from the Philippines. So, and the fact that you're all women, I'm so proud. I guess my question is this. As you mentioned, we're living in such a toxicity there's an onslaught of attack against facts, right? And even me as a regular consumer of facts, it's very tiring to even wade through what's real and what's not, what's opinion and what's not. Everything is tainted by opinion. So my question for you guys, because you're so very inspiring, what concrete steps do you do in your practical life so that you continue the fight? Is it something you drink in the morning, something you do when you wake up? Because I'm just consuming this. I'm not even fighting it, and I get tired. What do you guys do?
That's great.
Anyone?
well, I've never wanted to do anything else. And I started this in the profession because I wanted to do it and came to believe the value of facts and information and the rights of our audiences to have those facts. And so it became something that was greater than myself, and that's always worth getting up for in the morning. And I get to be, I meet people like this, oh my God, I mean, you sort of renew your faith right here just sitting and listening to these women.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So, to close this, another Filipina. I'd like to welcome my dear colleague, Janet Nepales, who's our, treasurer at the HFPA. She's also a reporter. She writes for the Manila Bulletin. She's also a Hollywood correspondent for GMA 7 TV. She graduated, cum laude from Santa Thomas University. Oh, wow. What else? She co-authored the book, called, and now I don't want to do any mistake, Filipina Women, Loud, Leading Without a Doubt. So, Janet has been named one of the most 100 influential women in Philippines. Please welcome Janet Nepales.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, my fellow journalists, and my kababayans who are here. As a member of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, I'm honored that the HFPA and the Los Angeles Times, in collaboration with the Committee to Protect Journalists, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, have joined together to present this valuable program of activities for our inaugural LA Press Freedom Week. And what a way to open the week with the topic of press freedom and elections, with Committee to Protect Journalists Board Chair Kathleen, Carroll, Direct 36 Investigative Journalist Blanka, Zöldi, Los Angeles Times Deputy Editor, Section Editor of Opinion Ed, Tang, and my idol and inspiration, Time Magazine 2018 Person of the Year, Rappler CEO and Executive Editor and Co-founder, Maria Ressa. Listening to our panelists tonight brings me back to the days when I was a reporter for the Times Journal in the Philippines. a newspaper owned by Imelda Marcos' brother, Cocoy Romualdez. It was the year Ferdinand Marcos was president, and during those days, I witnessed how our editors backed down to advertisers and politicians who were close to the Marcoses to kill stories that would be detrimental to the image or agenda of the current regime. I witnessed firsthand how the low-income people in the provinces would be bought by payola or a mere sack of rice, and how posters announcing the Marcos victory were already made even before the elections were even done. I was in the Philippines when Benigno Ninoy Aquino, the #1 opposition leader of the Marcoses, and then a potential candidate for president of the Philippines, was killed on the tarmac when he came back home. The day when I rejected these practices, voiced out my opinions, and went on the streets with my husband, Ruben, to protest against the Marcos administration, my editors gave me my walking papers and laid me off, together with other reporters who rejected their practices. Even my own father reprimanded me, for as he said, I was biting the hand that feeds me. Early on as a reporter, I learned the value of not being afraid to stand for what is right, to speak your mind and do what you think is right, even if it means losing a lot. Because what matters in the end is that you know what deep in your heart you did what you were supposed to do, to write the truth, to speak the truth, and to do what a true journalist is supposed to do. Because without truth, what are you a journalist for? I'm glad and very proud that we are having these conversations today, and I would like to thank our esteemed panelists again for having and sharing their valuable experiences and thoughts, and to all of you for coming tonight. Thank you, and hope you will join us for the rest of the week. Good night.